The wheelchair tipped. 200 people in tuxedos and gowns watched Charlotte Bennett, the untouchable CEO, who had never once asked for help, start to fall sideways off the ballroom stage. And the only man who moved was a night shift supervisor nobody knew by name. Ethan Carter dropped his tray across 12 feet in 3 strides and caught her before her body hit the floor. The whole room gasped. Then he grinned and said the 6 words that would blow up his entire life. "Careful, boss. People might think you love me." Everyone laughed. She didn't. She turned red and whispered something that stopped his heart cold. "Before I tell you what she said, do me a favor. Drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe a good man's quiet kindness always comes back around, hit subscribe and follow the channel because you are going to want to see how this one ends." Now let's begin. Ethan Carter had exactly 3 rules, and he'd never broken a single one. Work hard. Stay invisible. Get home to Lily before she wakes up. For 4 years, those 3 rules had held his whole life together, like the last 3 bolts on a bridge that should have collapsed a long time ago. He was 41, a widower, a single father, and a night shift operations supervisor for Bennett Hospitality, one of the biggest hotel and resort companies in the country. He wore a gray uniform. He signed a clipboard. He clocked in at 10 at night and clocked out at 6 in the morning. And in between, he made sure 1,000 rooms got cleaned, 100 deliveries got logged, and not one single guest ever saw the machine that kept the whole thing running. That was the point of him. Nobody saw him. That was how he liked it. "Carter." His shift manager, Doug, waved a folded paper at him from across the loading dock. "You got voluntold." "For what?" "Annual gala, ballroom. They're short on floor staff for the executive tables, and somebody upstairs wants a supervisor there to run interference." Doug shrugged, unbothered. "Congrats. You get to wear a bow tie and hold a tray for a bunch of millionaires." Ethan didn't move. "I work nights. That's the deal I signed. I've got Lily. It's one evening, 7 to 11. Get a sitter. I don't have a—" He stopped himself. He never explained. Explaining was a kind of asking, and Ethan Carter didn't ask. "Fine. One night." He called his neighbor Mrs. Alvarez from the parking lot. She said yes before he finished the question, the way she always did, because she'd known Lily since the day they moved into that little 2-bedroom apartment with the water stain shaped like Florida on the ceiling. "You go, mijo," she said. "The girl and I will make pancakes for dinner. Terrible idea. She'll love it." "Thank you, I mean it. I'll pay you." "You will not." She hung up on him. That was the thing about Ethan's life. It was small and it was hard, and it was held up entirely by people who refused to let him thank them properly. He'd seen Charlotte Bennett exactly 4 times in 3 years, always from a distance. Always on a screen or a stage or the far end of a hallway. Everyone in the company knew the story, or thought they did. Charlotte Bennett took over Bennett Hospitality at 31 after her father died, turned a struggling regional chain into a national brand in 6 years, and did it all from a wheelchair. 8 years earlier, before Ethan's time, there'd been a car accident. A rainy highway. A jackknifed truck. She'd walked into that hospital as a bright young executive, and she'd rolled out of it as something the tabloids couldn't stop writing about, the CEO who runs an empire from a chair. Ethan hated that phrase. He didn't know why. He'd never met the woman. But every time he saw it printed under her photo, something in his chest tightened, because he knew what it was like to have the worst day of your life become the only thing people ever say about you. He knew that better than almost anyone alive. So when he walked into that ballroom at 7 o'clock in a rented tux that pinched his shoulders, and he saw her across the room in a deep blue dress, laughing at something an executive said, while her eyes stayed completely perfectly empty, he recognized it instantly. She wasn't there. Not really. She was doing the thing he did every single day. She was performing fine, so nobody would ask. He'd have known that look anywhere. For 3 hours, he did his job. He kept the executive tables running. He redirected a drunk regional manager toward coffee. He caught a champagne tower before it toppled and got 0 thanks for it, which suited him fine. And then, near the end of the night, the CEO of the company was wheeling herself toward the ramp at the edge of the stage, and one of the ballroom's decorative floor cables, the kind some overpaid event planner had taped down badly, caught her front wheel. It happened in half a second. The chair jerked. Her weight went sideways. And Charlotte Bennett, who had spent 8 years making sure no human being ever saw her fall, was about to go over the edge of a stage in front of 200 of the most important people in her industry. Ethan didn't think. Thinking would have taken too long. He dropped the tray later. He'd remember the crash of it, the 12 glasses shattering, the whole room turning to look, and he was moving before the sound finished. 3 strides. He got a hand under her shoulder and an arm across the back of the chair, and he stopped all of it, the fall, and the fear, and the 50 cameras, with the flat of his own body. For 1 second, she was pressed against his chest, and he could feel her heart going like a hummingbird. He set the chair down square on all 4 wheels. Steady, gentle, like it was nothing. The room was silent. And Ethan Carter, who had one job that night, stay invisible, looked down at the most powerful woman he'd ever stood next to, saw the raw panic in her eyes that everybody else was too far away to see, and did the only thing he knew how to do when someone was that scared. He made a joke. "Careful, boss." He gave her a crooked, easy smile, the same one he used on Lily when she skinned her knee. "People might think you love me." The room broke. 200 people laughed, that big, relieved, grateful laugh a crowd lets out when a disaster turns into nothing. Somebody actually applauded. The tension popped like a balloon, and just like that it became a funny story, a near miss, a thing they'd all tell tomorrow. Did you see when the CEO almost went off the stage? That was the whole point of the joke. Give them somewhere to put the fear. Let her keep her dignity. Make it small. He started to straighten up, started to fade back into the gray where he belonged. And then he made the mistake of looking at her face. Because Charlotte Bennett wasn't laughing. Her cheeks had gone red, not embarrassed red, something deeper, and she was staring up at him with an expression he could not read, an expression that had nothing to do with the 200 people in that room. She looked at him like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. She leaned in so quiet that not one soul but him could hear it, and she whispered, "What if I do?" Everything stopped. The music, the laughter, the blood in his own ears. For a second, Ethan Carter genuinely wondered if he'd hit his head, if he'd fallen too, if he'd imagined it. Because women like Charlotte Bennett did not say things like that to men like him. That wasn't how the world worked. He'd learned the rules of the world the hard way, and rule number 1 was that people in gray uniforms did not get whispered to by people in blue silk dresses. His mouth had stopped working. "Miss Bennett." An executive came rushing up, all teeth and concern breaking the spell. "My God, are you all right? Somebody find who taped those cables. I want them." And Charlotte Bennett straightened her spine, and her face closed like a door, and the empty, pleasant smile came back down over it like a shutter. "I'm perfectly fine, Marcus. It's handled. Thank the young man who caught me." The young man, not Ethan. She didn't know his name. Of course she didn't know his name. She wheeled herself away without looking back. Executives closing around her like water around a stone, and Ethan stood alone in the middle of the ballroom floor with broken glass at his feet and a sentence ringing in his skull that he was absolutely certain he'd hallucinated. "What if I do?" He picked up the tray. He cleaned up the glass. He did his job. But his hands were shaking, and they didn't stop for an hour. He got home at 11:40. Mrs. Alvarez was asleep on his couch with the TV murmuring. Lily was in her bed, one arm flung over the side, mouth open, dead to the world. 8 years old, and already too smart for her own good, already asking questions. Ethan didn't know how to answer, like, "Do you think Mom can see us? And why don't you ever go on dates like Katie's dad?" He stood in her doorway a long time. He thought about the accident that took his wife. 4 years ago now. A drunk driver, a Tuesday afternoon, a phone call at work. He thought about how everybody at the funeral had said the same thing, "If there's anything you need," and how not one of them had ever called again. He thought about how grief had turned him into exactly what he was, Now a man who worked nights so he wouldn't have to feel the empty side of the bed, a man who had 1 child and 3 rules and no space in his chest for anything else. What if I do stop it? He told himself out loud in the dark. You imagined it. Rich lady got scared, said something. Go to sleep. He did not go to sleep. He lay there until the sun came up, staring at the water stain, shaped like Florida, replaying 6 words in her voice again and again until they stopped sounding real. Charlotte Bennett did not sleep either. 40 floors up in a penthouse that a magazine had once called stunning, and that she privately called the nicest waiting room in the world. She sat by the window and watched the city and hated herself. What if I do? What was wrong with her? What on God's green earth had possessed her to say that? She was Charlotte Bennett. She ran a 9-figure company. She had sat across a table from men who wanted to buy her out, break her down, wait her out, and she had never once let a single one of them see her flinch. She had built her entire second life on one iron rule: never let them see you need anything, because the moment they saw need, they saw the chair. And the moment they saw the chair, she stopped being Charlotte and started being inspiring or brave or poor thing. And every one of those words was a cage with a bow on it. For 8 years, she had refused the cage. She'd outworked, outfought every person who ever pitied her. She had made herself untouchable, and tonight, a stranger in a rented tux had caught her before she fell. Not made a production of it, not turned it into a moment, not gazed at her with that awful soft face people made. He'd just caught her, set her down, and cracked a joke to give her back her dignity in front of the whole room. He'd protected her, not the CEO, her. And for 1 second, pressed against his chest with her heart going wild, she'd felt something she genuinely could not remember feeling in 8 years. She'd felt safe. And then, God help her. Her mouth had said, "What if I do?" before her brain could stop it, and she'd watched the color drain out of the poor man's face, and she'd fled like a coward. Charlotte pressed her hands over her eyes. Who even was that? She said to the empty penthouse. Then quietly, because she was Charlotte Bennett, and she never left a question unanswered for long. I'm going to find out. Ethan clocked in the next night fully expecting to be fired. That was the only outcome that made sense to him. He'd made a joke to the CEO. He'd touched the CEO. He'd probably violated 11 policies. He half expected HR to be waiting at the loading dock with a box for his things. Instead, Doug met him with a strange look on his face. Carter, you know anybody upstairs? No, why? Because there's a note in the system. Somebody flagged your file. Doug turned the monitor around. Please have Supervisor E. Carter available for a walkthrough of night operations. CB. Ethan's stomach dropped through the floor. CB, Doug said slowly. As in Charlotte Bennett. As in the woman whose name is on the building. Carter, what did you do at that gala? Nothing, Ethan said. I caught her chair. She almost fell. I caught her. Doug stared at him. You caught the CEO. It was nothing. CEOs don't put your name in the system for nothing, man. Doug shook his head, half amazed, half worried. A walkthrough. Nobody's done a night ops walkthrough with the actual CEO in the whole time I've worked here. That's 10 years. Ethan didn't answer. He was thinking about 6 words in a blue silk dress. What if I do? When? He finally said. Doug checked. Tonight, 2 a.m. She came at 2:04. The freight elevator opened at the far end of the sublevel. The ugly part, the concrete and pipes part of the building, the guests never saw, and Charlotte Bennett wheeled out of it in a plain dark sweater and no makeup, and no executives, completely alone at 2 in the morning, in the loneliest hour of the loneliest floor of her own empire. Ethan stood up so fast he knocked his clipboard off the desk. Miss Bennett, Mr. Carter. She stopped in front of him. Up close, without the dress and the lights and the crowd, she looked younger and more tired and more real. I'm told you run the night operation. Yes, ma'am. Then run it for me. I want to see it. A pause. Something flickered behind her eyes. All of it. He walked her through the whole thing. The loading dock, the linen routing, the way he'd rebuilt the delivery schedule to cut 2 hours of overtime, the little jury-rigged fixes he'd made that nobody upstairs had ever noticed. And Charlotte Bennett, who had come down if she was honest, for a reason that had nothing to do with linen, found herself actually listening. He was good. Better than good. He'd solved problems her whole logistics department billed her millions to think about, and he'd solved them with duct tape and common sense, and no expectation of credit whatsoever. "Why hasn't anyone promoted you?" she said. It wasn't really a question. Ethan almost laughed. "I work nights, ma'am. Nobody sees the night shift. That's kind of the whole point of it." Nobody sees the night shift. The words hit Charlotte somewhere she wasn't ready for. Because that was it, wasn't it? That was exactly it. He was invisible on purpose, the same way she was untouchable on purpose, and they'd both built their fortresses out of the same brick. If they can't get close, they can't hurt you. "Mr. Carter," she said, and her voice came out lower than she meant it to. "About the gala." He went very still. "Ma'am, if I crossed a line, You didn't." She said it too fast, then quieter. "You caught me. Nobody's caught me in 8 years. Do you understand? Not one person. They all either stand back and let me handle it because they're afraid of insulting me, or they swoop in and make it into a whole scene like I'm a child who fell off a bike." Her jaw tightened. "You just caught me. And then you made a joke so I wouldn't have to be humiliated in front of 200 people. And I don't know why, but that's the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very, very long time." The concrete room was dead silent. Somewhere a pipe ticked. "I said something I shouldn't have." She went on staring at a point over his shoulder because she couldn't quite look at him. "At the gala. I'd like to blame it on the shock. Let's both agree to blame it on the shock. Can we do that?" And Ethan Carter, night shift supervisor, single father, keeper of 3 rules, looked at this woman who ran the world from a chair and hid her loneliness behind a company, and he heard the fear under every careful word, and he understood exactly what she was asking. She was asking him to give her an exit, to make it small, to let her keep her dignity, the same thing he'd done at the gala. He'd done. So he almost took it. He almost said, "Of course, ma'am, blame it on the shock, forget the whole thing." Almost. But he was tired of being invisible, tired of the empty side of the bed, tired of 4 years of never once letting himself want a single thing. And something in her face, some small, terrified, hoping thing, made him break rule number 2 for the first time in his life. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "I don't think we can." Her eyes came up, startled. "Because I've spent 4 years being invisible," Ethan said. "And you're the first person in all that time who looked at me and actually saw me. And I don't think I want to blame that on the shock." He swallowed. "But I've also got an 8-year-old girl at home who's the only thing I've got left in this world, and you've got a company and a name and a board full of people who'd have a heart attack if they saw you down here right now. So I don't know what we're doing. I honestly don't." Charlotte Bennett looked at him for a long moment. And then, for the first time since a rainy highway 8 years ago, the untouchable CEO of Bennett Hospitality did something no board member, no executive, no reporter had ever seen her do. She smiled, really smiled, all the armor gone, and there were tears standing bright in her eyes. "Neither do I, Mr. Carter," she said. "Neither do I." The freight elevator hummed in the silence between them. Neither one of them moved to leave. Neither one of them moved to leave. And for a long moment, the only sound in that concrete room was the hum of the freight elevator and the tick of a pipe somewhere overhead. Then Charlotte Bennett cleared her throat, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand like she was angry at them for betraying her, and put the armor back on. "Well," she said, "I've kept you from your work long enough, Mr. Carter." "You're not keeping me from anything, ma'am." "It's 2:30 in the morning. It's a slow night." She almost smiled again. Almost. Then she wheeled her chair back a few inches, putting distance between them, the way she always did, the way she'd done with every human being for 8 years. "Good night, Mr. Carter. Thank you for the walkthrough." And she was gone back into the elevator, back up 40 floors to the nicest waiting room in the world. Ethan stood there for 10 full minutes after the doors closed. Then he picked his clipboard up off the floor, sat down at his desk, and tried to remember how to breathe like a normal person. He told himself it was over. He told himself she was embarrassed that she'd said her piece, that a woman like that would never come down to the sub-level at 2 in the morning again. He told himself all of it, and he was wrong about every single word, because Charlotte Bennett came back 4 nights later. She didn't announce it this time. There was no note in the system, no walkthrough, no excuse. The freight elevator just opened at 1:50 in the morning, and there she was in the same plain dark sweater, holding 2 cups of coffee in a cardboard tray on her lap. "I didn't know how you'd take it," she said before he could even stand up. "So I got you black. You look like a man who drinks it black." Ethan stared at the coffee, then at her. "You brought me coffee." "Is that a problem?" "No, ma'am, it's just—" He didn't know how to finish it. It's just that the CEO of a 9-figure company took an elevator to the loneliest floor of her own building at 2 in the morning to bring the night supervisor a cup of coffee, and I don't have a word for what that is. "It's just black is right, thank you." She handed it to him, and their fingers touched for half a second on the cardboard cup, and both of them pretended it didn't happen. That was how it started. Not with a kiss, not with a confession, but with a cup of coffee and 2 people who had spent years being alone, finding out they were a little less alone at 2 in the morning than at any other hour of the day. She came back the next week, and the week after that. Always late, always alone, always with some flimsy reason stapled to the front of it. She wanted his opinion on a scheduling problem. She wanted to understand the linen contracts. She wanted to see the loading dock at peak. The reasons got thinner and thinner until they were basically transparent, and neither of them ever said the real reason out loud, because the real reason was too big and too terrifying to say in a concrete room at 2 in the morning. "Can I ask you something?" she said one night, maybe 3 weeks in watching him log a delivery. "And you don't have to answer. Ask. Your daughter, Lily." She said the name carefully like it was made of glass. "You mentioned her. Just the 2 of you." Ethan's pen stopped moving. He didn't look up. "Just the 2 of us." Her mother. For a second he thought about giving her the short version, the version he gave everybody. She passed that shut the door before anybody could open it. But Charlotte Bennett had told him she felt safe when he caught her, and he found he wanted to give her something real back. "Car accident," he said. 4 years ago. Drunk driver Tuesday afternoon. Lily was 4. He set the pen down. "I got the call at work. I remember thinking this is a mistake. This is somebody else's wife. My wife is picking up Lily from daycare right now. And then I drove to the hospital, and it wasn't a mistake." Charlotte was very quiet. "So it's just us," Ethan said. 4 years now. She's 8. She's smarter than me and braver than me, and she asks me questions I can't answer, like whether her mom can see us, and I lie and say yes because I don't know what else to say." He finally looked up. "That's the whole story, ma'am. That's me." He watched her face, and he waited for it. The soft look. The "I'm so sorry." The pity that turned him from a man into a sad case, the same way it turned her from a CEO into a poor thing. He'd learned to brace for it, the way you brace for a needle. It didn't come. Instead, Charlotte Bennett looked at him for a long moment and said, "A drunk driver put me in this chair too." Ethan went still. 8 years ago. Rainy highway. I was 31, I'd just made VP. I was going to run the world. Her voice was flat and even, the voice of someone who had told this story to lawyers and reporters until every ounce of feeling had been squeezed out of it. A truck jackknifed. I don't remember the impact. I remember waking up, and I remember the doctor's face, and I remember the exact second I understood that the life I'd planned was over, and I was going to have to build a completely different one out of the pieces. She looked at him. So when you say a drunk driver took everything from you on a random afternoon, Mr. Carter, I understand that in my bones. I'm just about the only person you'll ever meet who does." The room was silent. 2 people. 2 rainy days. 2 lives that a stranger with a bottle had broken in half. And for the first time, sitting in that ugly concrete room, neither of them was performing fine. "That's why," Ethan said slowly, understanding dawning. "That's why you came down, that first night. It wasn't the joke." "It was the joke a little," she admitted. "But no. It was that you caught me and you didn't look at me like I was broken." Her jaw worked. "Do you have any idea how long it's been since someone touched me without treating me like I might shatter? My physical therapists are gentle. My assistants are gentle. My board is so gentle it makes me want to scream. You grabbed me like I was a person who was falling, and you set me down like I was a person who could stand back up, and you made a joke like I was a person who could take one." She had to stop. Her voice had gone thin. "I forgot what that felt like. I forgot people could do that." Ethan didn't say anything. He just reached across the desk and put his hand over hers, and she didn't pull away. And for a long time, the 2 of them just sat there, in the hum of the elevator, and the tick of the pipes, and the enormous impossible thing growing between them, that neither one of them was brave enough to name yet. It might have gone on like that for months, 2 lonely people meeting in the dark, and never quite saying it if Lily hadn't gotten sick. It was a Thursday. Ethan was 3 hours into his shift when his phone buzzed, and it was Mrs. Alvarez, and her voice was doing the thing that made every parent's blood go cold. "Mijo, don't panic, but the baby has a fever, and it's not going down. I gave her the medicine 2 hours ago, and it's climbing, not falling. 103.4. She's saying her head hurts and she won't eat, and I don't like it. I don't like it, Ethan." He was already standing. "I'm coming home, right now. Keep her cool, wet washcloth on her forehead. I'm coming." "You have work?" "Lily comes first. Always. I'm coming." He hung up and turned around to find Doug to tell him he had to go to burn whatever he had to burn to get home to his daughter. And instead, he turned around and found Charlotte Bennett wheeling out of the freight elevator with a cardboard tray of coffee because it was 2 in the morning and it was Thursday. And this was what they did now. She took one look at his face, and the coffee tray went down on the desk. "What's wrong?" "My daughter's sick. Fever won't come down. I have to go. I have to." "How high?" 103 climbing." "Then stop talking and go." She was already moving, already turning her chair toward the elevator. "I'll deal with Doug. I'll deal with the whole shift. You will not lose $1, and you will not lose this job. Do you hear me? Go home to your daughter." Ethan stared at her. "Ma'am, you don't have to." "Ethan." It was the first time she'd ever used his first name. It stopped him cold. "Go." He went. He drove home doing 60 in a 30, and he didn't care. He took the stairs 2 at a time because the elevator was too slow. And when he burst through his own front door, Lily was curled up on the couch under a blanket, small and flushed and miserable, and she looked up at him with glassy eyes and said, "Daddy, I don't feel good." And something in Ethan Carter's chest just broke clean in half. "I know, baby, I know. Daddy's here." He scooped her up, blanket and all, and pressed his lips to her forehead, and felt the heat radiating off her, and made a decision. "We're going to the doctor. Right now. Mrs. Alvarez, thank you. I've got her." And that was when there was a knock at the door. Ethan froze. It was almost 3 in the morning. Nobody knocked on his door at 3 in the morning. He opened it with Lily still in his arms, and standing in the hallway of his cheap apartment building, the one with the flickering light and the water stains and the smell of somebody's late dinner, was Charlotte Bennett. In her wheelchair, alone, at 3 in the morning, holding a paper bag. "You didn't leave your address in the system," she said, a little breathless. "But I run the company that runs your payroll, so." She held up the bag. "I brought soup, and children's Tylenol, the good kind, the dye-free kind, because the red dye keeps some kids up. And a thermometer, a real one, because I'd bet money yours is the cheap kind that reads 2 degrees low." She looked past him at the little girl in his arms. "You must be Lily." Lily lifted her head off her father's shoulder and looked at the woman in the chair, with the frank, unembarrassed curiosity that only sick 8-year-olds and very old men have left in them. "You're in a wheelchair," Lily said. "Lily." Ethan started. "I am," Charlotte said, completely unbothered. "A bad man in a truck hurt my back a long time ago, and now my legs don't work the way yours do. But my arms work great, and my brain works great, and I make excellent soup. Well, I bought excellent soup. Can I come in?" Lily considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. Then she said, "Are you the boss my daddy talks about? The one who almost fell?" Charlotte's eyebrows went up, slowly, deliciously up. She looked at Ethan, who had gone the color of a fire truck. "Your daddy talks about me. He said you're the smartest person he ever met, and you're scary, but not really scary." "Lily." "That," Charlotte said, and there was something in her voice Ethan had never heard before, something warm and unguarded and almost young, "is the nicest thing anyone has said about me in 8 years. Yes, sweetheart, I'm the boss who almost fell. And your daddy caught me. Now let's get you feeling better." What happened over the next 3 hours, Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. Charlotte Bennett, CEO of Bennett Hospitality. Terror of the boardroom. The woman whose gentle assistants tiptoed around her like she was made of glass, rolled into his tiny apartment and took over like a general. She checked Lily's temperature with the real thermometer, which read 103.9, and she made Ethan call the after-hours nurse line while she got soup into the little girl one careful spoonful at a time. She knew things. She knew that a fever that high but responsive was scary but not usually an emergency. She knew to check for a stiff neck and a rash. She knew somehow exactly the right story to tell a sick, scared 8-year-old to make her stop crying. And by 4 in the morning, Lily was tucked into her father's bed, with the fever finally breaking, giggling at a story Charlotte was telling about a princess who ran her whole kingdom from a flying chair and defeated the dragon not with a sword, but by making it fill out paperwork. And then the dragon got so tired of the forms, Charlotte said, that he just gave up and became an accountant, and that's why you should always do your taxes on time. Lily laughed. It was the first time she'd laughed in days, a real belly laugh that turned into a cough, and Ethan stood in the doorway of his own bedroom, watching a woman he'd known for 3 weeks make his daughter laugh, and he felt the last brick of a wall he'd spent 4 years building just crumble into dust. "She's asleep," Charlotte whispered a few minutes later, wheeling herself back out into the living room, pulling the bedroom door mostly shut behind her. "The fever's down to 101. She'll be fine. Kids run hot. Give her the Tylenol again at 6, and she'll wake up cranky and hungry and completely fine, I promise." Ethan didn't say anything. He couldn't. "Ethan?" She looked up at him and some of the confidence flickered. "Did I overstep?" "I overstepped. I know I did. I just heard the number and I couldn't sit 40 floors up drinking coffee while you—" She stopped. "I'll go. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. Don't." The word came out rough. He crossed the room and knelt down in front of her chair, so they were eye to eye, and up close at 4 in the morning, exhausted and without a single scrap of armor left between them, he said the truest thing he'd said in 4 years. "My daughter has been sick and scared for 3 days, and no one could make her laugh. Not me, not Mrs. Alvarez, nobody. And you walked in here 20 minutes ago, and you made her laugh, and you knew exactly what she needed, and you didn't treat her like a sad little girl with a dead mom. You treated her like a person." His voice cracked. "Nobody's done that for us in 4 years. Nobody's just shown up. You have no idea what that means." Charlotte's eyes were wet. "I think I do, actually. At the gala," Ethan said. "You asked me a question. What if I do? And I've told myself for 3 weeks that I imagined it, or that it was the shock, or that a woman like you would never—" He shook his head. "But you're in my apartment at 4 in the morning. You brought my sick kid the dye-free Tylenol. You know things about me nobody knows. So I have to ask you, and I need you to be honest, because I can't do the thing where I let myself hope, and then it turns out to be nothing. I've got Lily. I can't afford to break." Charlotte Bennett looked at him for a long, long time. It wasn't the shock, she said quietly. I've hidden behind that company for 8 years because it was safer than letting anyone close enough to leave me. And then you caught me, and you made a joke, and I said something I'd been afraid to feel for 8 years. And I have been finding excuses to see you at 2 in the morning ever since, because you are the first person in almost a decade who makes me feel like a woman instead of a wheelchair. A tear slipped down her cheek. So no, Ethan. It wasn't the shock. And it wasn't a joke. Not for me. Ethan reached up and wiped the tear away with his thumb, and neither of them moved, and the whole world narrowed down to a tiny apartment, and a sleeping child, and 2 broken people finally telling the truth. And then from the crack in the bedroom door, a small voice said, "Are you going to be my new mom?" They both froze. Lily was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, thumb in her mouth, watching them with sleepy, hopeful eyes. And before either adult could figure out how in God's name to answer that, the little girl padded across the room, climbed into Charlotte Bennett's lap without being invited, laid her hot little cheek against the CEO's shoulder, and fell back asleep. Charlotte went completely rigid. Her arms came up on instinct, holding the child, and she looked at Ethan over the top of Lily's head with an expression of such raw, undefended terror and wonder that it broke his heart. "I don't," she whispered. "I've never, Ethan. I don't know how to—" "You're doing it right now," he said softly. "That's all it is. You just showed up. That's the whole job. And Charlotte Bennett, untouchable, unbreakable, alone for 8 years, held a sleeping child against her chest at 4 in the morning and cried without making a sound, and for the first time in her adult life, she let someone watch her do it. They should have known it couldn't stay a secret. They were so careful. She came at night. She parked in the freight bay. She never once did anything anyone could point to. But a company is a small town wearing a suit, and small towns notice things, and it started the way these things always start, with a whisper. It was Marcus who noticed first. Marcus Webb Sr., VP, the same executive who'd come rushing up at the gala. Marcus had wanted Charlotte's job for 6 years and had never gotten within arm's reach of it, and Marcus was exactly the kind of man who kept a mental ledger of every time the boss did something unusual. And what Marcus had started to notice was that the CEO, who had never in 8 years shown up before 10 a.m., was suddenly coming in late and tired and sometimes smiling at nothing, and that there was a new name that kept surfacing in the night operations logs. E. Carter. "I'm just saying," Marcus said, leaning in the doorway of another VP's office, keeping his voice light, the way men do right before they slide the knife in, "that it's a little strange. She flagged some night shift nobody's file after the gala. Now she's coming in at 11 looking like she hasn't slept. You do the math." "You're reaching Marcus." "Maybe." Marcus smiled. "Or maybe our CEO, who the board already thinks is 1 bad quarter away from being too fragile to run this company, is having some kind of episode with a janitor." He let the word land. Fragile. It was the word they all used behind her back, the word she'd spent 8 years incinerating every time it got close, and Marcus knew exactly how much damage it could do. "I'd hate for that to get out. Wouldn't you?" It got out. Of course it got out. By the end of the month, it had traveled from the executive floor to the middle managers to the break rooms, mutating a little more with every mouth it passed through, until the version making the rounds was barely recognizable. In the version that reached Ethan, he was a gold digger who'd targeted a vulnerable disabled woman for her money. In the version that reached Charlotte, she was a lonely cripple. That word, someone actually used that word so desperate for affection, she'd lost her judgment and put the whole company at risk. Ethan found out when he walked into the break room, and 4 conversations stopped at once. He knew that silence. Every person who's ever been talked about knows that silence. The sudden interest in coffee cups. The careful not looking. He stood in the doorway and felt his face go hot, and his stomach go cold. And one of the day shift guys, a decent enough man named Petey, had the grace to look ashamed as he muttered, "Sorry, Carter. It's just people are saying stuff about you and Bennett." "What are they saying?" Ethan said very evenly. Petey wouldn't meet his eyes. "That you're, working an angle. That she's loaded and you're a single dad who needs money, and you did the math." He winced. "I don't believe it, for what it's worth. But it's everywhere, man. It's on the executive floor. I heard the boards asking questions." Ethan set his coffee down very carefully, because if he didn't set it down carefully, he was going to throw it. An angle. 4 years of working nights, so he'd never have to ask anyone for anything. 4 years of refusing Mrs. Alvarez's money, and Doug's pity, and everybody's, if there's anything you need. 4 years of being invisible on purpose, so nobody could ever accuse him of wanting a single thing, and the one time he let himself want something. The one time he let a woman into his life who made his daughter laugh. The whole world had decided in 1 month that he was a con man with his hand in a rich woman's purse. But that wasn't even the part that made him sick. The part that made him sick was Charlotte. Because if they were saying this about him, he could only imagine what they were saying about her. And he knew the way you know a storm is coming from the color of the sky, that the whispers weren't really about him at all. He was just the excuse. The real target was her. The board that already thought she was fragile now had a story. A juicy, perfect, devastating story about how the disabled CEO had finally cracked, gotten emotional, lost her judgment, put her company at risk over a night shift. Nobody. They were going to use him to take her down. The understanding hit Ethan Carter like a fist right there in the break room, and everything went very clear and very quiet in his head. He drove to the building that night 3 hours early. He didn't take the freight elevator. He took the regular one right up the guts of the company straight to the executive floor he'd never once set foot on, and he walked past a startled assistant and pushed open the door of Charlotte Bennett's office without knocking. She was at her desk, and she'd been crying. He could see it. The redness, she'd tried to fix the tissue crumpled by her keyboard, and the second she saw him, her face did something complicated. Relief and fear all tangled together. "You shouldn't be up here," she said. "Ethan, if someone sees you—" "They're already saying it," he said. "So who cares who sees me? You've heard it." She closed her eyes. "I've heard it. They're calling you fragile." He watched the word hit her, watched her flinch like he'd slapped her. "They're using me to do it. The board, Marcus, whoever. They found the one thing that ever got past your guard in 8 years, and they're going to use it to say you can't run your own company." His voice was shaking now. "I did this. I let this happen. I should have stayed invisible. That was the one thing I was good at, staying invisible, and I threw it away for a cup of coffee at 2 in the morning, and now they're going to take everything from you because of me. Stop it." Charlotte's voice cracked like a whip. "Stop it right now. You did not do this. They did this. Small, frightened men who've wanted my chair, my actual chair, my job for years, and who finally found a lever. That's not you, Ethan. That's them." "It doesn't matter whose fault it is," Ethan said, and his voice had gone very quiet and very final. "It only matters how to fix it, and there's only one way to fix it." He looked at her, and it took everything he had. "If I'm gone, there's no story. If I quit, if I take Lily, and I go somewhere else, some other company, some other city, then there's nothing for them to point at. You stay Charlotte Bennett. You keep your company. The whispers die in a week because there's nothing to whisper about." He swallowed hard. "I already wrote the letter. It's done. I just wanted to tell you to your face first because you deserve that. You deserve better than a note in the system." The office went dead silent. Charlotte Bennett stared at him, and then in a voice he'd never heard from her before. Not the CEO voice, not the careful voice, but something low and dangerous and absolutely furious. She said, "You wrote a resignation letter. Charlotte, you sat down and you thought about my situation, and you decided for me without asking me that the solution was for you to disappear." She wheeled out from behind the desk, straight at him, and there was nothing fragile about her now, nothing broken. She was pure, controlled fire. "You decided to sacrifice yourself. To take that little girl who climbed into my lap and fell asleep and rip her away from the only stability she has, uproot her whole life. All so that a bunch of cowards in a boardroom don't have to feel uncomfortable about the fact that I fell in love with a good man." Her voice broke on the last words, but she didn't stop. "How dare you? I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protecting." It came out of her like a scream that had been locked up for 8 years. Do you understand? That is the whole thing? Ethan, that is the entire thing. For 8 years, every single person in my life has decided what I can and can't handle without ever once asking me. My board protects me. My assistants protect me. My doctors protect me. Everyone is always deciding that Charlotte is too fragile to hear the truth. Too fragile to make her own choices. Too fragile to handle her own damn life. And now you're doing it too. You, the one person I thought actually saw me. The tears were streaming now, and she didn't wipe them away. You want to protect me? Then stop deciding for me. Ethan stood there stunned into silence, and he understood too late all at once that he'd done the one thing he'd sworn he'd never do to her. He'd treated her like she couldn't stand back up. I'm sorry, he whispered. God, I'm sorry. You're right. But Charlotte wasn't finished. She wheeled up until she was directly in front of him, close enough to touch, and she looked up at him with her whole face open and wet and terrified, and she asked the question that had been sitting under everything for 6 weeks, the question that would either save them both or end it right there in that office. I need you to answer me one thing, she said, and I need the truth, because I am done. I am so done with careful. Do you actually love me? Her voice dropped to almost nothing. Or was it always just a joke? Because if it was a joke, if this was ever about anything other than what I think it is, then fine. Write your letter, walk away, and I'll survive it the way I've survived everything else. But if it was real, she had to stop. She could barely get the words out. If it was real, then don't you dare leave me to protect me. Because that's not love, Ethan. That's just one more person deciding I can't handle my own heart. The whole thing. The 6 weeks, the coffee, the soup, the sleeping child, the 4 years of being invisible, the 8 years of being untouchable. All of it came down to this one moment in a quiet office, and Ethan Carter looked at the woman in front of him and stopped protecting himself for the first time since a Tuesday afternoon 4 years ago. It stopped being a joke, he said, the second I caught you at that gala, maybe before. Maybe it was never a joke at all. Maybe I just called it one because a night shift nobody isn't allowed to want a woman like you and I knew it. His voice was thick. I love you, Charlotte. I love you so much it scares me. I love that you brought my kid the dye-free Tylenol. I love that you made a dragon into an accountant. I love that you're sitting there furious at me instead of grateful, because grateful is what people give you, and furious is what you give someone you actually... He couldn't finish. He didn't have to. Charlotte was crying and laughing at the same time, that awful, beautiful sound people make when something breaks open inside them. Then tear it up, she said. The letter. Tear it up right now in front of me, because I'm not letting them win, Ethan. I'm not letting a room full of frightened men decide who I'm allowed to love. I've spent 8 years letting them decide everything else, not this. She grabbed his hand and held it against her chest, so he could feel her heart going the same wild hummingbird beat he'd felt at the gala. Not this. Ethan reached into his jacket, pulled out the folded envelope with the resignation letter inside, and tore it in half. Then in half again. Then he let the pieces fall to the floor of the executive office he was never supposed to set foot in. Okay, he said. Okay. No more deciding for you. No more disappearing. But Charlotte. He knelt down in front of her chair again, the way he had at 4 a.m, and took both her hands. If we're not running, then we're standing. And if we're standing, they're going to come at us with everything. The board, Marcus, the lawyers, the press. They're going to try to destroy us both. You have to be ready for that. We have to be ready for that. Charlotte Bennett wiped her eyes and lifted her chin, and for the first time in 8 years, the untouchable CEO of Bennett Hospitality wasn't hiding behind the company. She was ready to burn it down to protect the two people who'd finally gotten past her walls. Let them come, she said. And 40 floors down in a break room where 4 men had gone quiet when Ethan walked in, and 1 floor up in a boardroom where Marcus Webb was already drafting the memo that would call for an emergency vote on the CEO's fitness to lead the machinery that would try to tear them both apart, was already quietly beginning to turn. The machinery moved faster than either of them expected, Marcus Webb didn't wait. 3 days after Ethan tore up that letter, an email went out to all 9 members of the Bennett Hospitality Board marked confidential subject line as clean and cold as a scalpel. Emergency session, matters of executive judgment and fiduciary risk. No names in the body. Marcus was too smart for that. He didn't need names. He just needed to plant the seed and let 8 other frightened wealthy people water it with their own imaginations. Charlotte found out about the email the way she found out about most things from Diane. Diane Okafor had been her father's assistant, then her father's chief of staff, and after the accident, she'd become the single most loyal human being in Charlotte's professional life. She was 61, sharp as a tack, and the only person in the building who talked to Charlotte like she was a person instead of a policy. And when Diane wheeled into the office that morning, Diane didn't roll. Diane arrived with her reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair and her mouth set in a hard line. Charlotte knew before she said a word. "They've called a vote," Diane said. "Marcus. He's got it dressed up as fiduciary concern, but it's a no-confidence motion in everything but name. Next Thursday. And Charlotte, he's been making calls. Old Harrison, the Whitfield twins. He's got at least 4 votes leaning his way before the meeting even starts." Charlotte set down her pen very slowly. "On what grounds?" "You know on what grounds. Say it, Diane. I want to hear how it's going to sound in that room." Diane's jaw tightened, and she said it because Diane never flinched from anything. "That you've become emotionally compromised. That your judgment is impaired. That you're his word, Charlotte, not mine, entangled with a subordinate in a way that exposes the company to liability and suggests you're no longer, quote, operating with the clarity the position demands." She took off her glasses. "He's not going to say the word disabled. He's too clever. But it's underneath every sentence. He's going to stand up in front of that board and let them all think it without ever having to say it." For a long moment, Charlotte didn't move. Then she started to laugh, a low, humorless sound that scared Diane more than crying would have. 8 years, Charlotte said. 8 years I have run this company without a single misstep. I doubled the revenue. I saved 400 jobs during the downturn. I built the loyalty program that half the industry copied. And it took them 8 years to find a crack. And you know what the crack finally was? Diane? Not a bad quarter. Not a failed acquisition. The crack was that I fell in love with a good man. She looked up and her eyes were bright and furious. That's the thing they're going to use to say I'm unfit. Loving someone. God, isn't that just perfect? It's not just that you love someone, Diane said carefully. It's who. Charlotte, I have to ask you this, and I have to ask it as the person who's protected you longest, so don't bite my head off. This man, this Carter, do you know him? Really know him, because Marcus is going to dig. And if there's anything, a debt, an ex-wife, a bad decision from 10 years ago, he will find it, and he will put it on a slide, and he will project it onto the wall of that boardroom. And it won't matter that he's a good father. It'll only matter how it looks. And Charlotte, who thought she'd known where this conversation was going, felt the floor tilt slightly, because she realized Diane was right, and she hadn't thought about it at all. She'd never once dug into Ethan Carter's life. She'd never wanted to. Every other person who came near her she vetted, she researched, she ran background checks on out of 8 years of hard-won paranoia. But Ethan she'd just trusted. From the first cup of coffee. And now Diane was asking her whether she actually knew the man she was about to burn her company down for, and the honest answer was, she knew his heart. She didn't know his history. Then we get ahead of it, Charlotte said finally. Whatever's there, if anything's there, I want to hear it from him before I hear it from Marcus. Tonight. But she never got the chance to ask him. Because that same afternoon the story stopped being a whisper inside the building and became something much, much worse. It was 4:15 when Diane came back in without knocking, and this time her face was gray. "It's out," she said. "It's outside. A blog, one of those industry gossip sites. The ones the real press pretends not to read, but reads religiously. There's a piece. Bennett Harris and the night shift Cinderella story. Except it's not flattering. Charlotte, it's vicious. It's got a photo of him leaving your building at 3 a.m. Someone followed him. Someone's been following him. She set her tablet down on the desk. And it's got a source. An anonymous executive source. Talking about your quote, deteriorating focus. It names him. It names Lily. Charlotte's blood went to ice. It names his daughter. It says, and I'm quoting, the widowed single father who has an 8-year-old daughter and who was recently flagged in internal systems by Bennett herself. Charlotte grabbed the tablet. She read it once fast, her eyes flying over the words, and then she read it again slowly, and with every line something in her chest wound tighter because it was worse than Diane had made it sound. It didn't just imply she was compromised. It painted Ethan as a predator who'd targeted a vulnerable woman, and it painted her as a pathetic woman who'd been targeted, and it managed in 800 smug words to strip both of them of every ounce of dignity they had. And it had used a child to do it. "Get me the source," Charlotte said very quietly. "Charlotte, I know it's Marcus. Everyone knows it's Marcus. But I want it proven. Diane, I want a paper trail because when I walk into that boardroom Thursday, I am not going to defend myself like a woman on trial. I'm going to walk in there with the head of the man who put a child's name in a gossip column, and I am going to set it on the table." Her voice was shaking with rage. "He wants to talk about judgment. Let's talk about the judgment of an executive who leaks his own company's CEO to the press and drags an 8-year-old into it. Get me the proof." Diane looked at her boss for a long moment, and something in her softened, because in 20 years she had never once seen Charlotte Bennett fight for herself with this much fire. Fight for the company, yes. For the jobs, for the numbers, for her father's legacy. But never for herself. Never for her own heart. "I'll get it," Diane said. "God help me, I'll get it." Downstairs, Ethan found out about the article the worst possible way. He was picking Lily up from school. He'd switched to a rare day shift that week just to be near his phone, and the after-school pickup line was the usual chaos of minivans and honking, and he was leaning against his old sedan when he noticed 2 of the other parents looking at him. Not the usual way. A new way. One of them, a mother he'd nodded at 100 times without ever learning her name, was showing the other one something on her phone. And then they both looked at him, and then they looked away too fast. His stomach dropped before he even understood why. Then Lily came running out, backpack bouncing, and behind her came her teacher, Mrs. Kim, a kind young woman who had always been gentle with Ethan because she knew about his wife. And Mrs. Kim's face was doing something complicated and sad, and she pulled him aside while Lily climbed into the car. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "I don't know if you've seen some of the other parents. They saw something online. About you. And Lily's in it. I just wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it from Well. Before the whispering starts. Because it's going to start." She hesitated. "Is Lily okay? Does she know?" "Know what?" Ethan said. "What are you talking about?" And Mrs. Kim, with real reluctance, turned her phone around. Ethan read it standing in the school parking lot with his daughter waiting in the car, and by the 3rd paragraph, his hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the phone. His name. His dead wife mentioned like a footnote the widowed single father. And Lily. Lily's age. Lily's existence laid out in a gossip column for strangers to sneer at his little girl, reduced to a prop in a story about a rich woman and a gold digger. Something happened to Ethan Carter in that parking lot that had not happened in 4 years. The invisible man. The man with 3 rules. The man who never asked for anything and never made a scene. That man burned away. And what was left was a father whose child had been dragged into the mud by strangers with money. And it was the coldest, clearest rage he had ever felt in his life. "Thank you, Mrs. Kim," he said, and his voice was so calm it frightened even him. "I appreciate you telling me." He got in the car. Lily was buckling her seatbelt, chattering about a spelling test, completely oblivious, and Ethan looked at her in the rearview mirror, his whole world, 8 years old, humming to herself, and he made a decision that had nothing to do with staying invisible, and everything to do with the fact that someone had come after his kid. "Hey, Lil," he said. "How do you feel about spending the night at Mrs. Alvarez's? I've got some grown-up work stuff I have to handle." "Is it about the boss lady?" Lily asked. "The one who makes soup?" Ethan's throat tightened. Yeah, baby, kind of. I like her, Lily said matter-of-fact, kicking her feet. She's not scary at all. You should marry her so she can make soup all the time. And Ethan, in the middle of the worst afternoon of the last 4 years, laughed a real broken, helpless laugh because his 8-year-old had cut straight through 6 weeks of fear and shame and gossip to the one true thing at the center of it, the way children always do. We'll see, kiddo, he said. We'll see. He dropped Lily at Mrs. Alvarez's, and then he drove to the building, and for the second time in a week, he took the regular elevator up to a floor he wasn't supposed to be on. But this time, he wasn't going to Charlotte's office. This time, he'd read the byline on that article, and he'd made some calls of his own on the drive over, and he knew exactly which executive kept his office 2 doors down from the boardroom. Marcus Webb looked up from his desk to find a night shift supervisor in a wrinkled shirt standing in his doorway, and for just a second, just a flash, something crossed the VP's polished face that might have been fear. Then the smile came out smooth as glass. Mr. Carter, this is a surprise. I don't think we've been properly... You put my daughter in a newspaper, Ethan said. The smile didn't move, but Marcus's eyes did. I have no idea what you're... She's 8. Ethan stepped into the office and shut the door behind him, and there was something in the quiet way he did it that made Marcus's hand drift toward his desk phone. She lost her mother when she was 4. She just got over being sick. And this morning her father had to find out from her teacher that she's in a gossip column so that a man she's never met could win an argument in a boardroom she'll never see. Ethan's voice never rose. That was the terrifying part. I came up here to look at the man who'd do that, because I couldn't picture him. I kept trying to picture what kind of person drags a little girl into his fight, and I couldn't, so I came to see for myself. Marcus recovered fast. Men like Marcus always recover fast. He leaned back, laced his fingers, put the smirk back on. That's a very moving speech. But you're in over your head, Carter. You have no idea what you've walked into. Charlotte Bennett is not a woman. She's a $900 million asset with a board and shareholders and a fiduciary structure, and you're what are you exactly? A supervisor. You're a rounding error who caught a chair at a party and got ideas. He stood up now, straightening his jacket, comfortable again, back in control. Whatever this fantasy is, it ends Thursday. The board's going to see it for what it is. She's going to be quietly moved to some ceremonial role. I'm going to run this company the way it should be run, and you're going to go back to nights, if you're lucky. So do yourself a favor, and the little girl a favor, and walk away before you cost her a father. For a moment, Ethan just looked at him. And then he smiled, and it was not a nice smile, and Marcus's confidence flickered for the second time. You know what's funny, Ethan said. You just told me exactly what this is about. It was never about her judgment. You don't think she's compromised. You think she's in the way. You've wanted this chair for years, and you finally found a story ugly enough to knock her out of it, and you were fine, you were completely fine, right up until you had to use a kid to do it. He took a step closer. Here's what you don't understand about people like me, Marcus. Men like you spend your whole lives calculating. Everything's an asset, or a liability, a lever, a rounding error. And you look at me and you see a guy with nothing, so you figure, I've got nothing to fight with. His voice dropped. But that's backwards. A man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person you will ever meet in your life. And you didn't just come after me, you came after my daughter. So I want you to understand something very clearly before Thursday. He leaned down, both hands flat on Marcus's desk. I am going to spend every hour between now and that meeting finding out exactly how that article got its source. Every email, every call, every payment. And whatever I find, I'm going to hand to the one person in this building who has the standing to end you with it. You should have kept it clean, Marcus. You should have kept it about her. The second you put Lily's name in print, you turned a business fight into a personal one. And I don't lose personal ones. He straightened up, turned around and walked out, and he left the door open behind him on purpose, so that Marcus Webb had to get up and close it himself, and so that everyone in the executive suite saw the color of his face when he did. Ethan made it as far as the elevator before his hands started shaking again, this time from adrenaline, and that was where Diane found him. A woman he'd never met, 61 and sharp-eyed, who took one look at him and said, "You're the Carter." "Yes, ma'am." "You just came out of Marcus Webb's office." "Yes, ma'am." Diane studied him for a long, assessing moment, the way you'd study a horse you were thinking of betting on. "What did you say to him?" "I told him I was going to find out how that article got sourced, and I was going to hand it to someone who could end him with it." Something shifted in Diane's face. The wariness cracked just a little, and underneath it was something that looked almost like hope. "And can you find out?" "No," Ethan admitted. "I'm a night shift supervisor. I don't have access to executive email or phone records or wire transfers." I said it to scare him. He looked at her steadily. "But you do, don't you? You're her person, the loyal one. She talks about you." He hadn't known who Diane was 30 seconds ago, but he was putting it together fast. "You could get that trail, and you were already going to, weren't you? That's why you're up here looking like you haven't slept." Diane Okafor looked at this man, this rumpled, exhausted, furious father who'd just walked into the lion's den with nothing but a bluff and a broken heart, and she made a decision that would change everything. "Come with me," she said. "You and I are going to have a conversation Charlotte doesn't know about yet, and Mr. Carter." She started down the hall, moving fast, and he had to hurry to keep up. For what it's worth, in 20 years, I've watched 100 men try to get close to that girl for 100 wrong reasons. You're the first one who came up here to fight for her instead of over her. I noticed. She hasn't said it yet, and she may never say it the way she should, but that woman has been alone a very long time, and you walked into a boardroom war for her over a child who isn't even yours by blood. She glanced back at him. "So whatever we find in that trail, I want you to know something. You're not fighting alone anymore. She's got me. And now apparently so do you." Ethan had to stop for a second in the middle of that hallway, because in 4 years of being invisible, in 6 weeks of being whispered about, in one afternoon of the worst rage of his life, no one had said those words to him. "You're not fighting alone." "Thank you," he managed. "Don't thank me yet," Diane said grimly. "We've got until Thursday, and Marcus has a 4-vote lead, and the press has your daughter's name. Thanking comes later. Right now, we work." They worked. What Diane had that Ethan didn't was access and history, 20 years of knowing where every skeleton in the company was buried, because she'd helped bury half of them. And what Ethan had that Diane didn't was the one thing no executive ever had: he had nothing to protect. He wasn't worried about his career, or his standing, or his pension. He'd already decided in that school parking lot that he'd burn all of it down to protect Lily. And that kind of freedom, it turned out, was its own kind of power. By Tuesday night, they had a thread. Diane pulled the metadata on the anonymous source's quotes and matched the timestamps against building access logs. By Wednesday morning, they had a name, not Marcus's. He was too careful for that, but the name of a junior comms associate named Trevor Pratt, who'd badged into the executive floor at odd hours, and who it turned out had a brother-in-law who worked at exactly the gossip site that ran the story. And by Wednesday afternoon, Diane had done the thing that Ethan couldn't have done in 100 years. She'd sat young Trevor Pratt down in a glass conference room, closed the door, laid out the timeline, and watched the 26-year-old go pale and start to sweat. "Here's what's going to happen. Trevor," Diane said in the pleasant grandmotherly voice that had made grown men confess things for 2 decades. "You're going to lose your job either way. That's already decided. The only question left is whether you lose it as the young man who made one bad decision because a powerful executive leaned on him, or as the young man who took the whole thing down alone while that executive walks away clean and lets you be the story." She slid a legal pad and a pen across the table. "Marcus told you what to say, didn't he? Marcus gave you the quotes. Marcus made sure your brother-in-law's site got the exclusive. And Marcus is going to let you take every ounce of the fall." She tapped the legal pad. "Or you write down what actually happened. Right now, and I make sure the board hears it before they hear anything else." Trevor Pratt looked at the legal pad for a long, long time, and then he picked up the pen. Wednesday, 9 p.m. Charlotte's penthouse. Ethan sat across from her. Diane had brought him up, had orchestrated. The whole thing had said, only, "There's something you both need to see." And Charlotte read Trevor Pratt's signed statement twice, and when she finished, her hands were trembling, but not with fear this time. "He did it in writing," she said. "Marcus put it in writing. There's an email chain. He told a 26-year-old to leak his own CEO to a gossip site and drag a child into it, and he did it in an email because arrogant men always think they're too smart to get caught." She looked up and her eyes were shining. "Diane, this isn't a defense. This isn't me walking into that boardroom to save myself. This is a loaded gun," Diane said flatly. "Yes, and you have to decide right now how you're going to fire it, because you could use this to destroy Marcus. Quietly. Cut a deal, force him out. Keep it all internal, protect the company's image, and go back to running things exactly the way you have for 8 years. Untouchable alone, hidden behind the numbers." She leaned forward. Or what?" Charlotte said. Diane looked at her, then at Ethan, then back at her, and the old woman's voice went gentle in a way Charlotte had almost never heard. "Or you stop hiding. All the way. In front of everyone." Diane set the statement down. "Thursday, that boardroom is going to be full. Not just the 9 directors. Marcus has been so confident he's invited Observer's senior staff. He wants an audience for your execution. And the shareholder meeting is the week after that, which means half the financial press is already circling. You've got the biggest room you're ever going to get, and you have 2 choices about what to do in it. Charlotte and I can't make this one for you. You can walk in and win the way you've always won, cold clean, from behind the wall. Or you can walk in there and tell them the truth. About the accident. About the 8 years. About the coffee at 2 in the morning, and the sick little girl, and this man sitting across from you, and why you love him, and what it says about every one of them, that they think loving someone makes a woman unfit to lead." Diane's voice cracked just slightly. "One of those keeps you safe. The other one sets you free. But you can't have both, honey. Not this time." The penthouse went silent. Charlotte looked at the signed statement in her lap. The loaded gun. The thing that could destroy Marcus quietly and let her go back to the life she'd built out of armor. And then she looked at Ethan, who'd walked into an executive's office over her, Ethan, who'd stood in a school parking lot and chosen war over invisibility, Ethan, who was watching her now with those steady eyes and not saying a word, because he'd learned his lesson, and he was never ever going to decide for her again. "What do you want me to do?" she asked him. "Tell me the truth. If I take the quiet way, if I keep hiding, can you live with that?" And Ethan Carter, single father, keeper of 3 rules, looked at the woman he loved and gave her the most honest answer he had. "I can live with anything you choose," he said. "That's the whole point. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I already made that mistake once. But you asked me what I want, so I'll tell you what I want. I want you to stop being safe, Charlotte, because I've watched you be safe for 6 weeks. And safe is another word for alone. And I have spent 4 years alone, and I'm telling you it's not living. It's just not dying." His voice was thick. "You said you fell in love with me because I caught you, and I didn't treat you like you were broken. Well, this is me not treating you like you're broken. A broken woman takes the quiet way. You're the strongest person I've ever met. So walk in there Thursday and let them see all of it. Let them see you. Because the version of you that's been hiding for 8 years, she's magnificent, and nobody's ever gotten to meet her. Let them meet her." Charlotte Bennett stared at him. And then she started to cry, and she started to laugh, and she reached out and took his hand, and Diane's hand. At the same time, an old woman and a night shift father, the only 2 people in the world who'd ever fought for her instead of over her, and she held on tight. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Thursday." She wiped her eyes, and when she looked up, the fear was gone, and in its place was something Diane hadn't seen in the 8 years since a rainy highway took the old Charlotte away. "I'm going to walk into that room, and I'm not going to defend myself." Her voice grew steadier, with every word stronger, until it filled the whole penthouse. "I'm going to tell them the truth. All of it. And then I'm going to let them decide whether they've got the courage to fire a woman for the crime of finally letting herself be loved. Diane squeezed her hand. That's my girl. There's just one thing, Charlotte said, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face as she looked down at the signed statement in her lap. Marcus wanted an audience. He filled that room so he could watch me fall in front of as many people as possible. She lifted the paper. So let's give him his audience. Let's give him the biggest room he's ever going to get. And then let's find out what happens when the woman he thought was too fragile to fight walks in there and burns his whole plan to the ground with his own signature. Outside the penthouse windows, 40 floors down, the city glittered on, indifferent and enormous, and somewhere in that grid of lights, Marcus Webb was going to sleep soundly. Certain he'd already won, with no idea at all that a night shift supervisor, a 61-year-old chief of staff, and the woman he'd underestimated for 8 straight years had just spent the evening loading the gun he'd handed them, and that in exactly 36 hours in a boardroom, he'd packed himself, they were going to pull the trigger. 36 hours passed, the way the last mile of a long drive passes too fast and too slow at the same time. Thursday came. The board was set to convene at 2 in the afternoon, and by 1 o'clock, the 23rd floor conference room was already filling up in a way that no ordinary board meeting ever filled up. Marcus had done exactly what Diane predicted. He'd invited observers. Senior staff lined the walls. 2 seats near the back held people from the financial press who'd been quietly told there might be news worth witnessing. Marcus wanted an execution with a gallery, and he'd built himself a beautiful one, and he had no idea he'd built it for the wrong funeral. Ethan spent the morning at Mrs. Alvarez's kitchen table, unable to eat, watching Lily color at the other end of the table with her tongue stuck out in concentration. "You're doing the worried face," Lily said without looking up. "You do it with your eyebrows." "I'm okay, baby." "Is the boss lady gonna be okay?" Ethan looked at his daughter, 8 years old, cutting straight to the center again, and he didn't lie to her because he'd promised himself a long time ago that he'd only lie about her mother, never about anything else. "I don't know, Lil. Some people are being unfair to her today, and she's going to stand up to them. And I don't know if it's going to work." Lily thought about this. Then she slid off her chair, came around the table, and handed him the drawing she'd been working on. It was 3 stick figures. A tall one, a small one, and a third one, sitting in a chair with wheels, and above them, in the careful wobbly letters of a second grader, she'd written, "You can do it." "Give it to her," Lily said, "so she knows we're on her team." Ethan Carter, who had not cried in front of his daughter one single time in 4 years, because he'd decided she needed him to be steady, had to turn his face away and press his hand over his eyes for a moment. "Yeah, kiddo," he said when he could talk again. "I'll give it to her, I promise." He folded the drawing carefully and put it in his shirt pocket right over his heart, and he drove downtown. He wasn't supposed to be in that room. Charlotte had wanted him there, but Diane had been firm. His presence would only feed Marcus's narrative, would let them point and say, "There look the 2 of them together." Brazen. So the plan was for Ethan to wait outside on the 23rd floor, close enough to be there when it was over, far enough not to be a weapon they could use. He agreed to it because Charlotte asked him to. But he stood in that hallway with his daughter's drawing over his heart, and he watched through the glass wall as the woman he loved wheeled herself to the head of the table alone into a room full of people who'd come to watch her fall, and he thought his chest might crack open from the wanting to be beside her. At 2 o'clock exactly, Marcus Webb called the meeting to order. He was good. Ethan would give him that, watching through the glass, unable to hear, but able to read the whole thing in the body language. Marcus was smooth and grave, and reluctant, the very picture of a man who took no pleasure in what he had to do. He stood. He gestured. He put a slide up on the screen, clean bullet points, the language of concern, fiduciary responsibility, executive judgment, reputational exposure. He never once said the word disabled. He never once said the word woman. He just laid out point by careful point a portrait of a CEO whose personal choices had compromised her ability to lead. And Ethan watched the faces of the 9 directors around that table, and he watched several of them nod. Old Harrison nodded. The Whitfield twins nodded. Marcus had his 4 votes, maybe 5, and he hadn't even gotten to the article yet. Then Marcus put the article up on the screen. The gossip piece. Blown up huge, the vicious headline, the 3 a.m. photo of Ethan leaving the building, and Ethan's stomach turned to acid even through the glass, the paragraph that named Lily. Marcus let it sit there. He let the room read it. He spread his hands in a gesture that said, "I didn't want to show you this, but you had to see how far it's gone." And Ethan watched 2 more directors' faces close, and he understood that Marcus was winning right now. In real time, he was actually winning. And through all of it, Charlotte Bennett sat at the head of the table with her hands folded in her lap and said nothing. She let him finish. That was the thing Ethan couldn't understand from the hallway, the thing that made his heart pound. She let Marcus take his entire 20 minutes. Let him build the whole gallows plank by plank. Let him get all the way to the end and turn to her with that grave, sorrowful, victorious face and say the words Ethan could read even without sound. "Charlotte, would you like to respond?" And Charlotte Bennett unfolded her hands and rolled her chair back from the table and turned to face the whole room and began to speak. Ethan couldn't hear a word of it. He would have given 10 years of his life to hear it. But Diane, who was inside, who'd fought to be in that room as chief of staff, told him afterward what Charlotte said, and Ethan made her repeat it so many times that he came to know it by heart, the way you know the words to a song that saved your life. Charlotte started quietly. She didn't fight the slide. She didn't attack the article. She looked around the table at 9 faces, some of whom had known her father, some of whom had watched her grow up, and she said, 8 years ago, a truck jackknifed on a wet highway, and I woke up in a hospital, and a doctor told me I would never walk again. I was 31 years old, and in the weeks after that, do you know what frightened me most? It wasn't the chair. It wasn't the pain. It was watching every person I knew start to look at me differently. My friends got gentle, my colleagues got careful, and I made a decision lying in that hospital bed that I have kept for 8 years. I decided that I would never ever let any of you see me as anything less than the strongest person in the room. That I would outwork you, and outthink you, and outfight you, so that not one of you would ever get the chance to pity me. And it worked. I doubled this company. I saved 400 jobs. And I did it all from behind a wall so high that not a single person in this room has actually known me in 8 years. Diane said you could have heard a pin drop. Marcus has stood here for 20 minutes, Charlotte went on, and he has told you very carefully without ever saying it that a woman who lets herself be loved cannot be trusted to lead. And I want to thank him, because he's right about one thing. Something has changed in me. He noticed, and he's right. She paused. For the first time in 8 years, I let someone pass the wall. A man who doesn't want my money, he's refused 2 raises I tried to give him. You can check the records. It made my HR department insane. A man who caught me when I fell at the gala and made a joke so I wouldn't be humiliated instead of turning it into a scene. A man whose 8-year-old daughter climbed into my lap while she had a fever and fell asleep against my shoulder, and in that moment, I felt something I had not let myself feel since before the accident. I felt like a person. Not a CEO. Not a wheelchair. Not an inspiration or a tragedy or an asset. A person. A woman. Diane said that was where old Harrison, 80-year-old Harrison, who'd known Charlotte's father for 40 years, took off his glasses and set them down on the table and rubbed his eyes. Marcus wants you to believe that's a weakness, Charlotte said. He wants you to believe that the moment I let a good man into my life, I became fragile, compromised, unfit. So let me tell you what actually happened when I let him in. This man found out that a member of this company's executive team leaked me his own CEO to a gossip website. He found out that they put an 8-year-old child's name in print to win a boardroom vote. And a night shift supervisor with no power, no access, and nothing to gain decided to do something about it. Not for money. Not for me even. For his daughter. Because someone hurt his little girl. Charlotte's voice, Diane said, went very cold and very clear. And I'd like to show you what he found. And she nodded to Diane, and Diane stood up and put a new slide on the screen. Trevor Pratt's signed statement. And under it, the email chain. Marcus Webb's own words, his own address, the timestamps. The instructions to a 26-year-old comms associate make sure it mentions the daughter. It humanizes the victim. Angle. The coordination with the gossip site. All of it projected huge on the wall of the room. Marcus had packed himself. Ethan, watching through the glass, didn't need to hear anything to know the exact moment it landed. He saw Marcus's face. He saw the smooth, grave confidence hold for 1 second, 2 seconds. And then he saw it crack. And then he saw it collapse. And then he saw Marcus Webb stand up so fast, his chair went over backward, and start talking, gesturing his mouth, moving fast and desperate. And Ethan saw every director in that room turn away from him, one by one, the way you turn away from something you don't want to be seen looking at. Diane said Marcus got about 4 sentences into his denial before old Harrison held up one hand, just one hand, the way powerful old men do, and said, "Sit down, Marcus. For God's sake, sit down." And Marcus sat down. Charlotte let the silence hold. And then she said the thing that Diane said she'd remember on her deathbed. "I could have handled this quietly," Charlotte said. "I want you all to understand that. 2 days ago, I had this in my possession, and Diane advised me correctly that the smart play, the safe play, was to force Marcus out behind closed doors, protect the company's image, and go back to running things the way I always have. From behind the wall. Untouchable. Alone. And a week ago, I would have done exactly that. It's what I've done for 8 years." She looked around the table. "But a man I love reminded me that safe is just another word for alone, and that I have spent 8 years mistaking one for the other. So I'm not going to do the safe thing. I'm going to stand here, sit here in front of all of you and the press in the back, whom Marcus so helpfully invited, and I'm going to tell you the whole truth and let you do whatever you're going to do with it. Because I am done hiding. And if this board decides that a woman who tells the truth and loves a good man is unfit to run this company, then I don't want to run this company. But I don't think you'll decide that. Because most of you knew my father, and my father did not build a company for cowards." Diane said the room was silent for a full 10 seconds. And then old Harrison put his glasses back on and looked around the table and said, "I've heard enough. I move that we table the motion regarding Miss Bennett's fitness permanently and open a new matter regarding Mr. Webb's conduct. Do I have a second?" He had a second before he finished the sentence. Marcus Webb was placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation, walked out of the building that same afternoon by 2 members of security, past the very press he'd invited to watch someone else fall. Trevor Pratt, who'd told the truth when it counted, kept his job. Charlotte insisted on it over the objection of half the room, because she said a company that punishes the one honest man in the room worse than the liar who used him has learned nothing. And the vote that Marcus had spent weeks engineering, the vote that was supposed to end Charlotte Bennett's career, ended his, instead 9-0. Ethan was still standing in the hallway when the doors finally opened. The observers filed out first, murmuring the press, hurrying toward the elevators with their phones already out. And Ethan pressed himself back against the wall, invisible again, the way he knew how to be. And then the directors came, old Harrison among them. And as the old man passed Ethan, he slowed and stopped and looked at him with sharp, ancient, knowing eyes. "You're the Carter," Harrison said. "Yes, sir." The old man studied him for a long moment. "You found the email chain." "My daughter's name was in a newspaper, sir," Ethan said quietly. "I wasn't going to just let that stand." Harrison nodded slowly, and something in the old hard face softened by a degree. "I knew her father 30 years, he said. Good man, hard man. Built all this from 2 motels and a loan he shouldn't have qualified for. And when he died, and that girl took over from a wheelchair, half this board, Thought she'd last 18 months. He glanced back toward the conference room. She's twice the leader he was, but she's been alone up there the whole time. We all watched it. None of us knew how to say anything. He looked back at Ethan. You did more for this company today than any of us, son. You reminded us who she is. And then gruffly, because men of his generation didn't know how to end a sentence like that any other way, take care of that little girl. And he walked on. Ethan stood there, stunned, and then the last of the crowd cleared, and through the open doors of the conference room, he saw her. Charlotte alone now at the head of the empty table, her hands over her face, her shoulders shaking. All the strength she'd held for the last 20 minutes finally pouring out of her, now that the room was empty and there was no one left to be strong for. Ethan didn't wait for permission. He crossed the room and knelt down beside her chair, and she lowered her hands and looked at him with a face that was wet and wrecked and more beautiful than he'd ever seen it. I did it, she whispered. Ethan? I stood up and I told them everything, and I didn't hide, and I did it. I know you did. He reached up and wiped her tears with his thumb, the way he had at 4 a.m. in his tiny apartment. I watched every second of it through that glass. I couldn't hear a word, and it was still the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do in my life. Harrison stopped him, she said, half laughing, half sobbing. Old Harrison, who's never liked me, who never once. He stopped Marcus cold, and he moved to table, the motion permanently, and it was 9-0. Ethan, 9-0. I know. And Marcus is gone. They walked him out, and I kept Trevor's job, and... She stopped, and her breath caught, and she looked at him with a sudden fragile terror underneath all the joy. And now everyone knows. Everyone in that room, and the press, and by tomorrow, the whole industry. Everyone knows about us. About you. About Lily. There's no going back behind the wall now, even if I wanted to. It's out. All of it. I can't undo it. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. Tell me I didn't just blow up your life. Tell me I didn't just drag you and that little girl into a spotlight you never asked for. Because you never wanted any of this, Ethan. You wanted to be invisible. And I just made you the most visible man in this company in front of the entire financial press, and I did it without asking you. And oh God, I did the thing. I did the exact thing I screamed at you for doing. I decided for you. Charlotte. He took both her hands. Stop. But I have something for you. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper and opened it and held it up in front of her. 3 stick figures, a tall one, a small one, and one in a chair with wheels. And above them, in wobbly second-grade letters, You can do it. Charlotte went completely still. Lily made this for you this morning, Ethan said, and his voice was rough. She made me promise to give it to you so you'd know you were on our team. She drew you in the chair, see, because that's just part of you to her. It's not a tragedy. It's not an inspiration. It's just Charlotte, the boss lady who makes soup and turns dragons into accountants. That's who you are to my daughter. He had to stop for a second. So don't you dare sit there and tell me you blew up my life. My little girl drew you into our family before I ever got the nerve to. You didn't drag us into anything. We were already yours. We've been yours since the night you showed up with the dye-free Tylenol. Lily just figured it out before either of us did. Charlotte took the drawing in both hands, like it was made of something more precious than anything in the building. And she looked at the 3 stick figures, and she pressed it to her chest, and she cried in a way Ethan had never seen her cry. Not the silent tears from 4 a.m, but great shaking, whole-body sobs. 8 years of held breath finally letting go. I've been so scared, she said into his shoulder, because he'd pulled her against him now and she'd let him. For 8 years I've been so scared all the time and I never let anyone see it, not once, and I'm so tired, Ethan. I'm so tired of being the strongest person in every room. I know. I don't want to be strong all the time anymore. Then don't be. He held her tighter. That's the whole thing, Charlotte. That's the whole entire thing. You don't have to be strong with me. You caught yourself today in front of all of them. You don't ever have to do it alone again. That's what I'm for. That's what Lily's for. You've got a team now. It's a small one. It's just a night shift supervisor and a 61-year-old chief of staff and an 8-year-old who thinks you hung the moon, but it's yours and we're not going anywhere. They stayed like that for a long time in the empty conference room. The woman who'd run an empire alone for 8 years, and the man who'd been invisible for 4, holding on to each other in the wreckage of the plan that was supposed to destroy them both. And then Charlotte pulled back and wiped her face, and something shifted in her expression. The tears clearing, and underneath them, rising up that fire again. That new fire that had been born the moment she decided to stop hiding. "There's the shareholder meeting next week," she said. Ethan went still. "Charlotte, no, listen." She gripped his hands. "Today I told the truth to 9 directors and a room full of staff, but the whole company doesn't know yet. Not really. The employees, the ones like you, the invisible ones, the night shift, and the housekeepers and the front desk, they've heard the ugly version, the gossip version, the gold digger and the fragile cripple." The word came out of her without a flinch now. She'd taken its power away. "And next week I'm going to stand up in front of every shareholder and every employee and every reporter, and I'm not going to give them the ugly version. I'm going to give them the true one, not to defend myself. I don't need to defend myself anymore. Harrison already ended it. I'm going to do it because there are 400 people in this company who feel invisible, who think their worth is measured by their title, who've been made to feel small, and I have the biggest microphone I will ever have. And I am going to use it to tell them the truth that took me 8 years and a night shift supervisor to learn." "What truth is that?" Ethan said quietly, though he already knew. Charlotte looked at him and at the drawing still in her hand, 3 stick figures. "And you can do it." And she smiled through the last of her tears. "That a person's worth was never in the title," she said, "or the chair, or the paycheck. It was always in how they treat people when they think no one important is watching. You treated me like I mattered when I was just a stranger who fell at a party. You refused 2 raises. You worked 4 years of nights and never asked anyone for a thing. Marcus had a corner office and a 9-figure future, and he used a child to win an argument. And if that's not the whole lesson, if that's not everything that's wrong with how this world measures people, and everything that could be, right then I don't know what is." She squeezed his hands. "I want to say it out loud, to all of them. Next week. Will you be there, not hiding in a hallway this time? Next to me, where everyone can see. Because I'm done being ashamed of the best thing that's ever happened to me. And Ethan Carter, keeper of 3 rules. Work hard, stay invisible, get home to Lily." Looked at the woman he loved and felt the second rule fall away completely and forever. "There's nowhere else I'd be," he said. Outside, the afternoon light was fading over the city, and 40 floors down the press was already filing their stories. And somewhere across town, Marcus Webb was sitting in his car in a parking garage with his career in ruins, finally understanding what Ethan had told him 3 days ago, that a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person you will ever meet. But up on the 23rd floor in an empty conference room, a woman held a child's drawing to her chest, and a man held her hand, and neither one of them was hiding anymore, and neither one of them was alone, and in exactly 7 days, they were going to walk into the biggest room in the company together, in front of the whole world, and finish what a careless joke at a gala had started. The 7 days did not pass quietly. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Not the gossip version, the real one. Somebody in that packed boardroom, one of the observers, or maybe one of the reporters, Marcus had so foolishly invited, had leaked what actually happened, and the story that hit the industry press wasn't Bennett Harris and the night shift Cinderella. It was executive ousted, after leaking own CEO naming child in smear campaign. Marcus Webb, who had spent weeks building a narrative in which he was the reasonable man protecting the company from a compromised woman, woke up to find himself the villain of a story being read by every competitor, every recruiter, and every friend he had left in the industry. There were not many of the last kind by noon, and Charlotte Bennett, who had spent 8 years terrified of exactly this, of being seen, of being known of the whole world, finding out she was a woman and not a fortress, found that the thing she'd feared most had happened, and the sky had not fallen. If anything, the opposite. Her inbox filled with messages. Some from executives who'd never bothered to know her suddenly warm. Those she ignored. But others came from people she'd never expected, people far down the org chart, housekeepers and front desk clerks and line cooks in her hotels who somehow got a message to the top, and those she read every single one twice. One of them from a night shift housekeeper at the downtown property, a woman named Rosa who'd worked for Bennett Hospitality for 11 years, said only this: "Miss Bennett, I have cleaned these rooms for 11 years, and I did not think anyone up there knew people like me existed. I read what happened. I read that you love a man from the night shift. I have never been prouder to work here. Thank you for seeing us." Charlotte printed that one out. She kept it in her desk drawer next to Lily's drawing and on the hard mornings that came later, because there would be hard mornings. There always are. She took both of them out and read them. Ethan, meanwhile, was learning that being visible was its own kind of exhausting. Overnight, he'd gone from the man nobody could name to the man everybody was talking about, and it turned out both were their own kind of lonely, just from opposite directions. The other guys on the night shift didn't know how to act around him now. Doug kept calling him sir, as a joke that wasn't quite a joke. And on the second day, a reporter actually turned up at Lily's school. And that was the thing that nearly broke him, that put the old cold rage right back in his chest, a stranger with a camera near his daughter, until Diane. God bless Diane made 2 phone calls and had the man gone within 20 minutes and a very firm understanding established with his editor about what happens when you photograph a grieving 8-year-old for content. "You have a team now," Diane reminded him on the phone in the dry voice he was coming to love. "That includes me handling reporters. You handle the emotional parts, I'll handle the parts that require me to frighten people. It's what I'm good at." But the thing Ethan wrestled with most in those 7 days wasn't the reporters or the whispers or the strange new visibility. It was a smaller, quieter fear, one he hadn't said out loud to anyone, not even Charlotte. And it came to a head 3 nights before the shareholder meeting, when he sat across from her at her kitchen table. She'd started having him up cooking for him, and she was a genuinely terrible cook, which delighted him more than anything had in years, and he finally said it. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you argue with me, because I know you're going to argue." Charlotte set down her fork. That's an alarming way to start a sentence. "You're going to stand up in front of the whole company next week and tell them about us. And I said I'd be there next to you, and I meant it. I'm going to be there." He turned his coffee cup slowly on the table. "But I keep thinking about the promotion." "What promotion?" "That's exactly it. There isn't one. But there's going to be talk of one, isn't there? There's already talk. Doug told me people are saying the CEO's boyfriend is about to get bumped up to some cushy day job. And Charlotte." He looked up at her, and there was something raw in his face. "I've spent 4 years making sure nobody could ever say I asked for anything. That was the whole point of me. Work hard, take nothing, owe no one. And if I get promoted now, even if I earned it 10 times over, every single person in that building is going to say, 'I got it in your bed,' and I can live with them saying it about me. But Lily's going to hear it someday. Kids hear everything. And I can't." His voice cracked. "I can't have my daughter grow up hearing that her dad was a kept man. That everything he got from a woman feeling sorry for him. That's the one thing I can't survive, Charlotte. Not the reporters, not the whispers. That." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, and then instead of arguing the way he'd braced for, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Can I tell you what I did yesterday?" she said. "Without telling you, because I knew you'd say no." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What did you do?" "I took your name off the promotion list." He blinked. "You what?" "I had HR pull it. Any consideration of you for advancement is frozen, indefinitely. As long as we're together and I'm CEO, you cannot be promoted through any channel that touches me or anyone who reports to me." She said it plainly, watching his face. "You're going to stay exactly where you are, doing exactly what you do at exactly the pay you're at, and no one will ever be able to say you got a single thing you didn't earn on your own, because structurally it will be impossible for you to get anything at all." She squeezed his hand. "I did it the second Doug's rumor got back to me. Because I knew. I knew it would eat you alive, and I knew you'd never ask me to fix it, so I fixed it before you had to ask. I decided for you." A small wry smile. I know. I'm not supposed to do that anymore. But this one I'm not sorry for." Ethan stared at her. "You froze my own career, to protect my dignity." "I froze your career," Charlotte said, "because your dignity is the whole reason I love you, and I'll be damned if being with me is the thing that cost you the one thing you've protected for 4 years. So yes, you'll be the only man in America whose girlfriend runs the company and who will never ever get promoted because of it. And someday when Lily's old enough to understand, you'll be able to tell her the truth that her father was so honest that the CEO had to legally block him from ever getting a raise, just so no one could question his integrity." Her eyes were shining. That's the story she gets to grow up with Ethan. Not the kept man. The man so honest, they had to build a wall around him. And Ethan Carter, who had come to that kitchen braced for a fight, put his head down on the table and laughed until he cried, because in 4 years of being invisible, he had never once imagined that someone would love him enough to protect the very thing that made him impossible to reward. "You're something else," he said when he could talk. "You know that you're really something else." "I've been told," Charlotte said. "Now eat your dinner. I worked very hard to make it this bad." The morning of the shareholder meeting, Ethan woke Lily up early. "Big day, kiddo," he said. "You remember what we talked about?" Lily rubbed her eyes. "I get to come, and I have to wear the itchy dress. And I have to be good even though it's boring. That's the deal. But there's one more thing." He sat down on the edge of her bed. "Some people today might say some things. About me and about Charlotte and maybe about you. Not nice things. And I need you to know before we go that none of it's true, and none of it matters. And no matter what anybody says in that room, you are the best thing I ever did with my whole life. You got that?" Lily looked at him with those solemn, too old eyes. Is somebody being mean to Charlotte? Some people tried to. But she's going to stand up to them today, and we're going to be there so she's not alone. Lily thought about this. Then she nodded once decisively. "Okay, I'll hold her hand if she gets scared." Ethan had to look away for a second. They arrived at 11. The shareholder meeting was in the grand ballroom of the Flagship Hotel. The same ballroom Ethan realized with a jolt as they walked in, where all of this had started, where he'd caught a chair and cracked a joke and blown up his whole life. The same stage, the same floor. Only now there were 500 chairs and a podium and a projection screen the size of a garage door, and the room was full. Shareholders, employees, press the whole machinery of a public company assembled to hear its CEO speak. Charlotte found them near the front. She was in a deep blue dress, the same color she'd worn the night of the gala, Ethan noticed, and he understood it was on purpose, and she looked terrified and radiant in equal measure. "You came," she said, and her voice shook. "We came," Ethan said. "All of us. And Charlotte, one thing before you go up there." He crouched down to her eye level, the way he always did, and Lily crowded in beside him. "Whatever happens up on that stage, whatever they say, whatever they decide, you already won. A week ago, you couldn't have done this. A week ago, you were behind the wall. And you tore it down yourself with your own hands in front of everyone. So go up there and tell them the truth, and know that no matter what, the three of us are down here, and we're yours, and we're not going anywhere." Charlotte looked at him, and then at Lily, and Lily reached out and took her hand. Just took it the way she'd climbed into her lap that first night. No fear, no hesitation, and squeezed it hard. "You can do it," Lily said. "I drew you a picture, remember? So you'd know." And Charlotte Bennett, CEO of a 9-figure company about to address 500 people, held the hand of an 8-year-old girl for a long moment and drew a breath that seemed to reach all the way down to the bottom of 8 lonely years. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She wheeled herself up the ramp to the stage, alone the way she always went everywhere. But this time, when she reached the top and turned to face the room, she wasn't alone. And everyone in that room could see it, because down in the front row, a night shift supervisor in his one good suit and a little girl in an itchy dress were watching her with their whole hearts on their faces, and Charlotte Bennett looked at them and found the thing she'd never had at that podium before. She found she wasn't afraid. She started with the numbers because she was still a CEO and the shareholders had come for numbers. Revenue up, 2 new properties, the loyalty program outperforming projections. She gave them 10 crisp minutes of exactly what they'd come to hear, and the room settled into the comfortable rhythm of a well-run company reporting a good year. And then she set down her notes. "I'm going to depart from the agenda now," Charlotte said, "and I'd ask you to bear with me because what I have to say next matters more to me than any number on that screen." The room went quiet in a different way. "Most of you have heard something about me in the last week," she said. "Some version of a story. There have been a lot of versions. The ugly one, which a former executive of this company paid to have printed, and the truer one, which came out afterward. But I've never told you my version. I've never told you anything real in 8 years, so I'm going to do that now once, and then we can all get back to business," she told them. She told them about the accident, the rainy highway, the doctor's face. She told them about the decision she'd made in the hospital bed, never let them see you need anything, and how she'd kept it for 8 years, and how it had built her an empire and a prison at the same time. She told them in plain words, without drama, about a supervisor who'd caught her at a gala in that very room and made a joke to save her dignity. About coffee at 2 in the morning. About a sick little girl and dye-free Tylenol, and a dragon who became an accountant. And then she said the thing she'd come to say. "There's a man in this room," she said, "who has worked the night shift of this company for 4 years. He has never once been late. He rebuilt a scheduling system that our logistics department billed us millions to think about, and he did it with common sense and no expectation of credit, and when I tried to give him a raise for it, he turned it down. Twice. He has an 8-year-old daughter he's raising alone, and he works nights so that he can be home in the mornings when she wakes up. And in 4 years, not one person in this company knew his name." She paused. "I want to tell you why I fell in love with him. Not because he caught me when I fell, though he did. Not because he's kind, though he is. I fell in love with him because he treated me with total ordinary dignity before he knew a single thing about my title or my money. He didn't see a wheelchair. He didn't see a CEO. He saw a person who was falling, and he caught her, and then he made her laugh. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's what love turned out to be after 8 years of me believing I'd never have it. It was just someone treating me like I mattered when there was nothing in it for them." You could have heard a pin drop in a room of 500 people. "A week ago," Charlotte went on, "an executive of this company stood in front of our board and argued that loving this man made me unfit to lead. He argued that the moment I let someone past my walls, I became compromised, emotional, fragile. And I want to address that directly because I think it's the most important thing I'll say today, and I think it matters to more of you than just me." Her voice grew stronger. "There are people in this company, a lot of you maybe, who have been made to feel that your worth is measured by your title, that the people at the top matter, and the people who clean the rooms and work the docks and answer the phones at 3 in the morning are just invisible, interchangeable, a rounding error." She let the word sit. Anyone who'd read the leaked account knew exactly whose word it had been. "I know that feeling from the other side of it. Because for 8 years behind this podium in this chair, I was surrounded by people and I have never felt more invisible in my life. Nobody saw me. They saw a title or a tragedy or a symbol. And it took a man that this entire company had rendered invisible to finally see the woman that this entire company had rendered invisible. 2 invisible people who finally saw each other. Somewhere in the room, someone was crying, then someone else. "So here is what I want every person in this room to understand," Charlotte said, and her voice rang out now clear and unafraid, filling the ballroom to its gilded corners. "Your worth was never in your title. It was never in your paycheck, or your office, or your place on the org chart. And it is certainly not in your body, or your ability to walk, or any of the 1,000 things this world uses to decide who counts and who doesn't. Your worth is in how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. That's it. That's the only measure that has ever mattered. The man I love proved it to me. He was a rounding error to this company, and he turned out to be worth more than every executive on that board combined, including me. Because when a child he'd never met got hurt, he did the right thing at the cost of everything and asked for nothing in return. That's character. And character is the only thing that has ever made a single human being worth anything at all. She stopped. The room was utterly silent, 500 people holding one breath. "I've frozen his career, by the way," she added, and there was a wet, defiant laugh in her voice now. "In case any of you were wondering, he can never be promoted as long as I'm here because he refused to let anyone say he got something he didn't earn." So, no, this isn't a story about a man who climbed. It's a story about a man so honest we had to build a wall around him to keep him from being punished for his own integrity. That's who's sitting in your front row. That's the man I love. And I have never in my life been prouder to say a single sentence out loud. And then Charlotte Bennett did the thing that ended it. The thing that Diane said afterward she'd never forget as long as she lived. She looked down from the stage directly at the front row, directly at Ethan and Lily, and she said, "Lily, sweetheart, would you come up here for a second?" Ethan's head snapped up. This wasn't the plan. There was no plan for this. But Lily was already sliding out of her chair, unafraid the way she was unafraid of everything, and she walked up the ramp in her itchy dress, and Charlotte pulled her gently into her lap, right there in front of 500 people and the entire financial press. And Lily reached into the little purse she'd insisted on bringing and pulled out a folded piece of paper, and Charlotte took the microphone and held it down so the whole room could hear the small, clear voice of an 8-year-old girl. "This is the picture I drew," Lily said, holding it up, and the projection screen behind them. Diane in the control booth, quick as ever, caught it and blew it up 30 feet tall. 3 stick figures, and "You can do it" in wobbly letters. "That's my dad, and that's me, and that's Charlotte. I drew her in the chair because that's just how she is. It's not a sad thing, it's just Charlotte. And I put her in the middle because—" Lily thought about it the way she thought about everything seriously. "Because that's where the mom goes." The room broke, not into gossip, not into scandal. Into the sound of 500 people who had come expecting a business meeting and instead watched 2 wounded people and a little girl tell them the truth about what actually matters. And it was the sound of applause. Real applause. Standing applause. People on their feet. And somewhere in the middle of it, old Harrison was standing too, the 80-year-old man who'd never liked Charlotte, wiping his eyes and clapping like his hands would break. And down in the front row, Ethan Carter stood alone, watching his daughter in the lap of the woman he loved 30 feet tall on the screen behind them, the whole room on its feet. And he thought about a joke he'd made in this exact ballroom a lifetime ago. "Careful, boss. People might think you love me." He'd said it to give her dignity. He'd said it to make the fear small. He'd said it as a night shift nobody who was never supposed to be seen to a woman who was never supposed to be reachable, and he'd called it a joke because a man like him wasn't allowed to mean it. And it had turned out to be the truest thing he had ever said in his life. The months that followed were quieter, the way life always gets quieter after the storm that changes everything. The press moved on the way it always does. Marcus Webb's investigation concluded exactly the way everyone knew it would, and he left the industry entirely. The last anyone heard, he'd taken a job at a firm 3 states away where nobody had read the story, and that was punishment enough to have to start over somewhere small and hope no one ever Googled his name. Trevor Pratt, the young man who'd told the truth when it counted, was still at the company, and Charlotte quietly made sure he got the mentorship he should have had all along. Because she believed, and she said so often, that a person should be measured by their best decision under pressure, not their worst one. Ethan kept working nights. He never did get promoted. Charlotte kept her promise, and the freeze stayed in place, and he was glad of it every single day, because it meant that when Lily got older, and someone inevitably said something cruel, he could look her in the eye and tell her the whole true story. He kept his 3 rules mostly. Work hard, that one never changed. Get home to Lily, that one never would. But the second rule, stay invisible, he let that one go finally and completely, because it turned out that being seen by the right people was worth all the years of hiding from the wrong ones. Charlotte led the company with a confidence she'd never had before, because for the first time, she wasn't leading from behind a wall. She was just leading as herself in the chair without apology, and it turned out the company loved her more for it, not less. She started a program she never named it after herself, though the board wanted to, that pulled talented people up from the invisible parts of the company, the night shifts and the housekeeping staff and the loading docks, and gave them a real path up. Rosa, the housekeeper who'd written her that first letter, ran the whole thing within a year, and Charlotte became part of a family. Slowly, the way real things happen. She was terrible at it. At first she'd never been anyone's family, didn't know the rhythms of it, would work too late, and forget that someone was waiting now. But Lily was patient with her, in the way children are patient with people they've decided to love. And Ethan was patient with her, in the way he was patient with everything, and she learned. She learned to come home. She learned that home was a thing you could have. One afternoon, almost a year after a careless joke in a ballroom, Ethan came into the kitchen of the house they shared, now a real house, with a yard with a ramp Ethan had built himself over the course of one determined weekend. And he found a new drawing taped to the refrigerator. 3 stick figures again, but bigger now, more detailed, the careful work of a 9-year-old instead of an 8-year-old. A tall one labeled Dad, a small one labeled Me, and in the middle, in a chair with wheels, one labeled, not Charlotte this time, Mom. Ethan stood in front of that refrigerator for a long, long time, and then he felt Charlotte come up beside him, felt her hand find his, and he looked down and saw that she'd seen it too, that she was crying the way she'd learned she was allowed to cry now, quietly, without shame, in her own kitchen, with her own family. "She changed it," Charlotte whispered. "She didn't tell me. She just changed it." "Yeah," Ethan said, his own voice thick. "She does that. Figures things out before the rest of us are ready. Always has." Charlotte pressed her hand over her mouth, staring at the word Mom. 8 years of loneliness and one careless joke, and a whole life she never thought she'd have, all gathered up in 4 wobbly letters on a piece of construction paper. "I never thought I'd get this," she said. "After the accident, I decided I'd never get this. A family. A refrigerator with a drawing on it. I decided I'd trade all of it for the company for being untouchable, because untouchable was safe. And this?" She gestured at the drawing at the kitchen, at the whole impossible life. "This was never safe. This could always be taken away." She looked up at him. "And you know what I finally figured out? The thing you tried to tell me in that conference room." "What's that?" "That safe was never worth it. That I spent 8 years protecting myself from the only thing that ever would have made me happy." She turned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, and she laid her head against his chest, the way Lily had that first feverish night. "You caught me at that gala," she said. "And you never let go. Do you understand that you never once let go?" And Ethan Carter, who had lived his whole adult life by 3 rules, who had buried a wife and raised a daughter alone, and made himself invisible, so the world couldn't hurt him again, held the woman he loved in the kitchen of a house he'd never dreamed he'd have, and understood at last that the careless joke everyone in that ballroom had laughed at a lifetime ago had never been a joke at all. It had been a door that 2 wounded, guarded, lonely people had been standing on opposite sides of for years, each one certain they'd be alone forever, and one thoughtless, kind, perfect sentence had cracked it open just wide enough for them to see each other through. "Careful, boss. People might think you love me." She had. She did. She always would. And that was the truest thing either of them had ever known. That love was never about the title or the chair or the money or the walking or any of the 1,000 things the world uses to decide who deserves it. It was about who catches you when you fall, and whether they let go afterward, and whether you're brave enough finally after all the years of hiding to let them stay. Ethan Carter caught Charlotte Bennett when she fell, and neither one of them ever let go again.